However, remember that this path is not perfectly straight. And setting these two intersections will divide our work into the upper and lower parts. The upper one will contain smaller objects such as buildings, houses and cottages, while the lower one will contain the ruins of a castle. And thanks to this you can also see the scale of this castle, how big and gigantic it is. They are next important elements in the next stages, such as small architecture, greenery, and it looks similar to this. It is easier to draw and plan it this way than if we started drawing the buildings at the very beginning and then only the roads to them. This would make it difficult to connect them with straight lines. And here you have an example of such a building. It is good to start by sketching the walls, not necessarily all the invisible ones, and only then the roof. And at the very end there are some details, some elements still protruding from the roof. This is from general to specific. This rule is important at virtually every stage of drawing or painting and makes it easier to control the entire work at various elements of its creation. At the very end, light and shadow, and draw it so that you know that it is light and shadow in your sketch. You can also draw it thicker so that it doesn't disappear under the few layers of paint that will appear before we start painting it. For example, we'll ignore houses and the shape of the roof, but we will paint, for example, light and shadow on a subsequent layer. And only when we have buildings and a road can we sketch trees. So what's important here is your focus, so that you do it quite precise. This is already in the foreground. If you apply it precisely, it won't be as noticeable as in the background. That instead of such a small fragment on the roof, just mark it. You will mark some large plane and it will, for example, look strange. In the list of colors used in this work, if you don't have a certain color, you can use another one. And just before we do this, we need to make sure that the layer that we painted earlier, the light layer, has dried completely. Only then do we lightly wet the upper part of the work with the sprayer, and then going from the top to bottom on a slight tilt of the work, you can tilt it slightly and paint this gradient. I started with cerulean and cobalt and gradually moved to purple. Then I add some purple and sepia to it. I'm not in a hurry because this wash will take a long time to dry, and besides my work is slightly tilted, so the layer of water that remains on the edge will always allow me to continue this wash without any problems. And I'm gradually turning into brown, and I even slightly warm them with natural and burnt sienna. While the wash is still wet at the top, I add some brown shades near the roofs, buildings and also onto the road to emphasize that it is a slightly different color. These are dirt roads, so they are earthy, gray-brown in color. It depends on what angle you are painting from now. I suggest that it should not be a large angle, 15 degrees, 20 degrees at the most. For example, we can now, while the wash is still wet, gently wash out the road with a brush and a small amount of water. If there is not too much water and the wash is not dry yet, this way you will highlight the road a little, distinguish it from the ground on which we will later paint the grass. In my opinion, it is worth doing it, but if you don't have time, if the wash has already dried, you will still have to paint the grass in a different color. But in my opinion, this way you can make the road a little bit better and change its color a bit in some places. However, we can do this when the wash is still a little damp. This is a very low level of moisture, the paper is already matte. You need to feel whether your top layer is wet or not. It's easy to check. You can gently touch the top layer with a brush somewhere on the side where it won't hurt. If this causes any change in the wash, it's still a little damp. If not, and the brush was clean, then nothing should happen, even in this wet in wet painting technique. So, with this stage of painting, greenery, in such aerial shots you can show a lot, just greenery and roads. But see, this is how it turns out thanks to the fact that we laid the first layer at the beginning. This layer of color, this road, this ground. Thanks to this, we can now say that we are cutting out roads and buildings from this wash. This is called negative painting, one of the basic techniques in watercolor. And we do not forget about the basic watercolor techniques when painting even very advanced subjects, such as this one. Remember, if the edges of the paper start to peel off, as in this case in the upper left corner, look, the masking fluid we applied to the roofs made our work so much easier, and we had to focus at least on these elements while painting. And slowly we can move on to the next piece of grass. It's closer to the castle. Here I would like to remind you that we need to get closer to the color from the upper part in the fragment, a more cool green with some blue and purple added, and we are gradually warming it up. Browns such as burnt sienna, natural sienna. For example, slightly different colors or intensities or accuracy. Because there are many types of contrasts, for example accuracy contrast, that some washes are painted precisely and another less precisely. Only this accuracy can be interpreted differently. For example, you can paint with a dry brush, smear these washes, paint with a sprayer or paint with cauliflower effect, or deliberately water them down somehow. Such works are more attractive because they have the so-called painting nut. That is, fragments that are painted precisely with more means of expression, and fragments that we let go, which are painted with fewer means of expression. And it is precisely what means of expressions you use, how they are used, and their quantity that also builds the character of the work in your style. You have to develop style by painting many works. This cannot be done by painting one or two works, but through years of practice. but the beginning of your style have certainly already appeared even at the stage where you were beginners. It is worth drying the work completely because we will be removing the masking fluid. And this is important here, the work must be completely dry, both from below and from above, because if you still have any moisture left, you can scrape off the masking fluid along with the paper of the color and gradually giving up the sepia mixture and replacing it with a mixture of burnt sienna and natural sienna. Somewhere close to the castle, perhaps even magenta will appear in the mix. And these rectangular brushes work great. They significantly speed up work. Because washing it out anyway makes the color a little whiter, but it won't be white. However, adding white directly will result in a very white smoke, which in the case of cool light works very well in the term of colors, but in the case of the golden hour it may spoil the effect a bit and we will suddenly have some too strong white washes that will not match the rest of the colors.